Hi, everybody. Today I'm joined by my good friend, Stu Wagman, who has been a production manager in the apparel business for over 40 years. He's been to 52 countries, lived in 7. He's worked for Ralph Lauren, J. Crew, Lululemon, just to name a few. And today he's going to help shed some light on what it takes to be production ready as a fashion designer, the ins and outs of what it takes to have a smooth production run. And these are things that really matter, because ultimately you want your garments to be on time in the highest quality possible. You want it to match your pre-production sample so that there's no problems at retail. But before we jump into that, Stu, I'd like to ask you a little bit about your history and where you got your degree, why production, and what led you to, your first job.
My father was in the clothing business. He was a textile engineer. He was very much, he had a lot of expertise in construction, in yarn, in knitting, in weaving. And so I was always going to factories when I was a young boy, 10, 11, 12, watching the circular knitting machines go around, watching the linking and the fashioning marks for sweaters and knits. And then we used to go to woven factories. My father made a lot of flannel shirts back in the days. So I would watch and learn how to sew at each operation in the sewing line, which was very interesting and fun for me. I was always artistic. I always liked clothes. I always liked fashion. And I guess that has to do with, again, with my father always bought me nice clothes, and he would explain to me how they were made. And I really loved it. I went to the Philadelphia College of Textiles and Sciences, and I got my degree in textile, apparel construction, and some marketing. And then I moved to New York, and I started working for a retail chain called Charivari, which at that time was the highest end boutiques in Manhattan. They carried labels that nobody carried back in the 70s. They were the first. Yohji Yamamoto, Jean-Paul Gaultier, Claude Montana, these kinds of brands. And I really learned a lot about that market in those years. And then I graduated into getting a job in actual production where you make the clothes. And that was really far more interesting to me than being in the retail side.
Yeah, there is a difference, isn't there, between having an idea in your head and then actually being able to produce it, which I think a lot of times in the past I've seen very creative designers that have a vision, but it's really not producible, right, for the price point that they want or the market, the demographic, or they get a lot of things wrong as far as the sourcing and the timing, and there's a lot that's involved in production. So a lot of our viewers are at the very beginning of their career, and some of them are maybe more advanced. But I'd like to ask you, what do most designers get wrong about production when they launch their first collection? Like, what should they keep in mind? Like, what are they missing, or what are the questions maybe they should ask themselves when designing and thinking about actually producing the garment?
Sure. I think the most important thing is you have to establish who is your customer first. Why would they want to buy what your vision is? And how will you bring that vision to them if that's the case? So step one, you have to obviously have a good idea or something that you believe in, your passion. But to take the next steps, you have to have a lot of time, you need proper funding, and you really need to think about your end game. Who's going to buy the product? Are you going to sell it by retail? Are you going to sell it online through your own website? How are people going to find that website? What's your marketing campaign going to be like before you even consider making the garments? Sure, you can design a collection. I've done it. I've done this myself because I actually wanted to build my own brand. But at this point in my life, I just decided it's too much time and it's too much money. So I decided to not do that. But there are people who still do it every day. They have a dream and they want to follow it. But you really have to know all the pieces of the puzzle from the front side first before you back into spending all your time and money on a collection. So I think designers have to really think about this big picture. It's very easy to design a beautiful line and even make some samples and sew them yourself. And these look great, and this is wonderful. But before you take the next step, how much is it going to cost? You need to know. How much is it going to sell for? Who is your customer? And how are you going to reach that customer? And I think designers really need to step away a little bit from the creativity part and really get to know the second part, unless you have a partner who's going to do that part.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it is left and right brain if you're doing it yourself, which
Correct.
is difficult, a difficult transition, I think, for some designers. So it sounds like from what you said that messaging is, of course, important, that you have something distinct to say in the space and that you understand the space, your avatar, right?
Yes.
But also it sounds like there are a lot of other considerations. Like the first, maybe from what I heard, is pricing. Are you priced for your market? And are you going to be able to deliver it at that price point to your market and in the time frame? So are there questions that maybe a designer should ask themselves when they're, for instance, sourcing and making a garment, to make sure that these questions are answerable? And let's say the collection has 30 pieces in it. So what kinds of questions as a designer and production manager did you ask yourself, or would you ask yourself?
Well, I would ask myself, if it is a 30-piece collection, obviously you're not going to make it in one place. You're going to have, in 30 pieces, you're going to have knits, you're going to have wovens, you're going to have a myriad of items and styles to produce. So that's the first thing you need to think about, is the breadth of your collection and how complicated it is and how much variation is there between fabric and construction.
So I think what I'm hearing is, if I can interject, is like, let's say you're making something domestic, something in China, something in Korea. You want to make sure that the deliveries all work together to be able to get the fabric and the trim and the make and everything,
Correct.
including the transit time here, so that it lands all at the same time. So timing and sourcing is important. Is that
Correct.
what we're talking
Designers
about here?
usually design a collection at least a year out before it's going to actually be delivered. Sometimes it's 18 months. At Ralph Lauren, it was between a year and 18 months, and sometimes even longer if it's a special collection that required custom fabrics, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to be aware of all these issues before you even take step one. And if you're ready to take step one, you will need time, you will need capital, you will need to have a marketing person, and you will also have to have your sourcing set up in advance, which means you'll have to find the factories, you'll have to find the fabric mills or the places you want to procure your raw materials, trims, accessories, buttons, zippers. All these things have to be looked at, and the deliveries have to be looked at before you can even start. But I would say from sample to finished production in today's world is at the very least 3 to 4 month process, and just for the first delivery, and that's for a small collection, very small. And if you're looking for a lot of units in a big collection, or even a small amount of units in a big collection, you're going to have multiple sourcing all around the world, all coordinated at the same time to make sure your delivery as a collection is complete.
That sounds like a lot for one person to handle.
It's a lot of jobs for one person,
Yeah.
and if you're one person, it's a lot. It's
Yeah.
a lot to bite off.
Right.
It can be done, and I've seen people do it, but again, it takes a lot of time and a lot of capital and a lot of bandwidth to be able to absorb what you need to know to get it done.
And a lot of passion, I think.
I think that starts in the beginning.
Yeah.
When you have
to have enough to get you through all of those long nights and
Very
those
true.
moments, right?
Very
that every
true.
entrepreneur, designer has. Is there a source where it sounds like there's so much to be done? Are there any, for instance, shows where it's all in one, where a designer can go and source and find a manufacturer and find fabric and trim in one place?
It's difficult to find one place, especially if you have your own vision of what your fabric should be like or feel like, or you see something in the market, or you're in a fabric mill, or you're in a store and you buy something and you say, oh, I want to copy it. I want it to have this hand feel. I want it to be similar yarn count. I want it to be woven like this or knitted like this. You can narrow your search a little bit more if you have a very clear vision. Once you have that, you have to find the right partners to make it. Now, you can go into some production facilities that are pretty much soup to nuts. They have a lot of stock fabric, they have a lot of fabric left over where you can get an idea, or they have their own fabric mills they work with that they can take you to, and they can show you several things if you're going to make your own fabric, which takes a lot of time. And so it's very hard to find a one-stop shop. It's available, but again, it's a one-stop shop, and so it might not be specialized in something that you want to make in a certain way.
Right.
So you're going to have, in my opinion, I've always had many sources, many factories, many fabric suppliers that I bought from, zippers, buttons, trims, labels.
Yeah.
It's a very cohesive group that you have to build. And once you get that familiarity with them and they get that familiarity with you, it speeds up things a little bit.
Yeah, it does oil the process, so
Yes.
it does run smoother. Can you, let's say, assuming that we are in production, we've made this beautiful collection, we've sent the tech packs over, which is a whole other episode, making a correct tech pack, but let's say that something happens, which something always does in production, a design change or something, a delivery is not.
Fabric's late.
Something like that. What are the biggest things you think that are, hurdles that designers have to, jump over in production, like making a small change? Let's say that they've decided that they don't want, a 3/4 inch seam allowance, and they want it to be 1.5 inches because they're rolling it over or putting some trim on it or something else. How do these little changes affect their production time and the production line?
It's all about when you want to make a change. Obviously, you make a first sample, and then you make a second correct sample, and hopefully you don't have to go too far past that, because if you sample, again, time. So if you find the right partners in manufacturing, and you have a rapport, and they kind of know what you want, and they have a tech team that you can work with, that cuts the timing. But if you want to change something after your sample's been approved, before production, you have a good chance of changing it with not a lot of issues, unless you're trying to get more fabric consumption. If you make a seam bigger, allow more seam allowance, as you said, and that's going to take more fabric, and you've already ordered the fabric, you're going to have a little bit of a shortage perhaps. Or you might not be able to add to that fabric order to make it because the time's been cut off. So you really have to be careful in the sampling process and really get it right, and be careful on your changes. Changes happen, there's no doubt about it, and it depends where you are in the timeline of your production, of whether that change can really be made physically, economically, and delivery-wise.
So up until the time that something is cut, for instance, there's an opportunity for change. But if you try to change it afterwards, how does that affect your delivery?
If it involves more consumption, you're going to get less amount of units.
You'll have to reduce the order.
Correct.
If somebody ordered 300 pieces, they might only get 250 or
Correct.
whatever it is.
That's
the
correct.
yield will be different.
That's correct. Now, of course, if you decrease it and it's less consumption, it doesn't matter. So it's depending on the exact issue, how it will affect your production.
Right. And then how does that affect the production line?
Well, if you change a sewing operation, or you add an embellishment, of course, again, you will need time to do that. Once it's in production, it's very hard to make a change. It's almost impossible, I would have to say, without causing a huge problem on delivery and also the actual sewing of the garment. They might have to add an operation or two operations, and that will take time. That will change the whole line of the production, and it's going to create delivery issues, of course.
Yeah.
Everything is about time. Everything is about delivery.
So it's very, very important that you vet everything up front, is from what I'm hearing. And then when you're saying sampling, that means pre-production sampling. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
You have to get a final sample that's signed off by you and your manufacturer, and that sample is hung at the end of the line, and that's what the sewers have to follow, with a tech pack behind it.
So my other question is, when designers send tech packs to the factory, what are the common things that factories look for, and what are the things that really create hiccups later? What do you think designers should know when they send a tech pack in?
I think the designer has to know at least a little bit about sewing and about process. How many stitches per inch they want to use, or what's the right amount of SPI you need to use. How difficult is it to cut? How difficult is it to sew? The fit is very important, obviously, so you have to get the right fit. And I think the designer has to think a lot more now than making the sketch and, wow, this is going to look great, than making the sketch and saying, okay, let's see, you're going to need this kind of armhole, or I want a dolman sleeve, or whatever it is that you are trying to design, and how you want the garment to look and fit. You have to really think about how it's going to be made. There's just no escaping that. Unless, again, you have a partner who will take that sketch and then come back to you and say, well, we can do this, but we can't do this, and we can't do this, but we can do this. And you have to be able to go with the flow, so to speak, and accommodate the production into your design. I think that's very important, and I don't think a lot of people understand that process.
So if I were designing a line today and I was working with a factory or a production manager, when would be the appropriate time to meet with them and show them, this is my concept? When would be an appropriate time to bring them in and say, oh, what should I plan, and how should I think about this? For instance, if I had a collection that had a full fashion sweater, a leather jacket, denim jeans, and some cut and sew knits and some woven jackets, I mean, that would be a whole production conversation, right?
Correct.
At what point would that be relevant to say to your production manager or your factory and say, hey, I have a collection I want to talk to you about? When would that be appropriate?
Well, you have to do that. I think you have to start that conversation in the beginning, even maybe while you're in the design process. You already have, if you're a designer, you already know how many SKUs pretty much you want to design, and you already know, like, as you say, I want a leather jacket, I want a jean, I want a sweater, I want a shirt, a woven shirt, and I want some knit shirts, cut and sew knit shirts. So that's pretty much 5 different factories you're going to be working in. So you can either find all those places yourself, which again takes a lot of time, especially if you don't understand the manufacturing process. I would partner up with somebody or hire somebody who knows sourcing, who knows production. Even if it's made in LA or New York or in America someplace, you still need to go through the same processes. And sometimes in America, because we're lacking sources now and experienced people, because we don't do this kind of labor, everything's moved to Asia and all over the world. I mean, I lived in Asia for almost 20 years on and off, because that's where the hub of production is worldwide right now, I think. So getting back to your question, it would behoove you to hire a sourcing production person who's been around the world, who knows, I can make this sweater here, I can make this jean here, I can make this leather jacket here, et cetera, and get the job done. But again, it takes a lot of time, and you have to really know and be concise about what you're making. And then you can share it with somebody, and then they will start to give you a time. Another option is to find an agent. There's many agents in Hong Kong, in China, in Vietnam, in Italy, in France, everywhere in the world. You can go to an agent that already has a design team, they have a production team, sometimes they have a pattern maker and a marker team, and they have their own group of factories that they use for different things, and they can easily find another factory. If they're not making leather jackets, they can find you a place. And then you pay them a commission for that, as opposing to hire your own staff. Sometimes it's a good option, sometimes it's costly. You have to weigh it out yourself. But again, you need to start all this over a year in advance when you want your collection. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah,
it's
it
a
does.
long question.
Yeah, the agency is a great option. I've used agencies in the past. They're great in some respects.
Yes.
And they're not that great in some respects, because then you're
Correct.
really locked into their own sources and their own factories, and
Correct.
it's sometimes limiting. But you can always go out and source something on your own and tell the agent you want to use with
Yes,
that
you can.
source.
I've done that many times.
Right? So, yeah, it's good to have a partnership in different countries. And those agencies, let's say they're in Hong Kong, they will work in the other countries, Vietnam,
They all work
Africa.
in other countries,
and-
yes. They all outsource.
Okay.
They will take your collection and say, I need to make this in Vietnam, I need to make this in Malta, I need to make this in China.
So from what I'm hearing, it's important for designers that are really right brain to have left brain analytical skills as well. So
You need to understand the timeline of the business. And I think a lot of designers are convoluted with that. A year, I need a year. You need a year. I've done it, I know. And a year, if you can do it, it's pretty good. In other words, getting your vision onto paper, into sampling, into material purchasing, accessory purchasing, into cutting, sewing, washing if you need it, finishing and packing. That's a lot of steps, as you can see.
you've worked with some very successful brands. Can you tell me why you think that those brands were so successful and have longevity?
I think the number one reason is the passion, and I'm not going to let anything get in my way. Once you have that attitude, it's a little easier to bulldoze your way through some of the other processes. But you also need to have the time and understand who is your customer, who's going to buy this, who's going to be into your vision, and know what that market is and be aware of it and study it a little bit. How are you going to do your marketing? Because I think in today's world now, there's so much out there, so many different things, that it's really hard to focus on your target customer and reach that target customer. I think that's very important right now for the designer to think about.
Thank you. And so if you were, let's say your daughter wanted to be a fashion designer today, what is the one thing that you would tell her and the advice you'd give her as a takeaway from this interview? What is the one thing, if they only remembered, the audience remembered only one thing you said, what would it be?
It's hard to have one thing. I think first, of course, you need the passion and the vision, and a very clear one that you're focused on, and you're not going to go like this. You're just going to be honed in on your vision. The second thing is, do you have the time to do it? Because it takes a lot of time. Third, I think you really need to find the right partners and the right people to help you, because it's something, unless you're sewing every piece yourself, which most likely you won't be, you need help. You will need help in production, you will need help in sampling, you will need definite help in marketing and sales. And I think if you, and again, you'll need capital, because it will cost you money, as in any business, to start up a company. And so you have to figure out how much you can spend, what's your return going to look like. You really need to think a little bit about the future and the business end before you even start. So I would tell her, my daughter, that those things are most important: the time, the vision, passion, the drive, and the capital to start, and the help. Sorry, 4 things.
It really does take long-term vision, doesn't it, to launch a brand?
It does. It does.
And to message, yeah, and to have all that crystal clear.
It does, but it's that's how brands are started. That's how brands are built, and that's how visions are actualized. And where you can go into a store and hold this up and say, you know, this is my vision. This is my piece of art. This is my sweat and blood and tears, and here it is, and that's it.
And we both have seen that sweat, blood, and tears in the
Yes,
business.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, over the years.
We have. I have.
Well, thank you, Stu, so much for joining me today. And I just want to give a shout out to Boneyard Star. We're in their design studio here
Magnificent space.
in Las Vegas. And if you have an opportunity, check the website, come in, make an appointment. It's a fantastic space. Stu this is your first time here.
Yes.
And he's like a kid in a candy store. And he's been in some very high-end places. So
You can also see in this place it's a person who makes the garments, who gets her fabrics reconstituted, or fabrics that were rescued, garments that were rescued, and pieces them together. She's got 4 sewing machines, a pattern table. She's a pattern maker. She's a sewer, cutting. Everything is right here, and this is the kind of place where you might want to come into to see what it takes to make something from start the vision to the end.
yes, and I think that to your point, the founder and owner of Boneyard Star, Nina Vallejo, she's got all those qualities that you talk about. She's got vision, passion, foresight, time, energy.
She knows her market. It's
Yeah.
very specialized. It's a
So-
very niche business, but it's a very cool business.
Yeah.
And I would make my way down here just to see the fabric and her ideas. Excuse me.
So check out the website too, boneyardstar.com, and I will be interviewing Nina again soon. I did interview her, and that will be on the website, on YouTube at Yoko Kelly, about how she found the place and decided it was the place for her studio. So thank you, Stu, so much.
Thank you, Yoko. It's
I
always
appreciate
a pleasure.
you.
You too. Thank you so much.